Eduardo.
Dr. Warren and the Committee of Correspondence has sent us the warning. The British be here soon.
Philadelphia and Boston get the lion's share of the Revolutionary War tourists. Virginia gets its share too. But somewhere down the line is New York and New Jersey. And while it's important to see the big stuff, I think you're going to find some jewels with me as I drive through New York.
Welcome to Drive Through History. Today, I'd like you to join me while I visit some important historical locations from the Revolutionary War era in New York City. I gotta admit, for a guy from Texas, this place is about as foreign feeling as things get here on U.S. soil. I'm a little bit out of my comfort zone. I'm just not a big city guy. I like to see cows grazing. I have friends named Bubba. But me and my trusty Jeep are here to explore the urban canyons and find the remnants of old New York. New York from long, long ago. Wouldn't that be Old York? Flush with victory after driving the British out of Boston, George Washington was batting 1,000 as he prepared for his next big showdown. He was 1-0. People were excited. There was great support for the war effort. The Continental Congress had just signed the Declaration of Independence, and we were winning. And everybody loves a winner, right? Well, not everyone. New York was not Boston. And it's thought that perhaps as many as half or more of the people living in New York were loyal to the king. It was a city divided against itself.
This is Battle Hill on Long Island, now home to one of the most beautiful cemeteries in the whole country. While not the home to a major battle in the American Revolution, it still nevertheless is honored as an important site in the Battle of Long Island and contains this shrine to liberty. After they left Boston in defeat, the British Army and Navy spent a little time chilling out in Canada, and then after a few months moved out under new command. British General Sir William Howe came in to replace the disgraced General Gage. Now, the British strategy was focused on capturing New York City, crushing the American army, and forcing a negotiated end to the rebellion. Howe's plan was to negotiate first, and failing that, attack with a vengeance, with massive force. He had assembled the largest fleet of warships on the planet, and his brother, Admiral Richard Howe, was in command of them.
General Howe had assembled some 30,000 crack troops, both British troops and German mercenary troops. They were highly trained and equipped with the best technology of the day. Washington had 20,000 troops of various quality that ranged from good to bad. They were neither highly trained nor well equipped. Many had just come off the farm. Even after his victory at Dorchester Heights in Boston, George Washington was under no illusion about there being some serious, tough sledding ahead, and he rightly guessed that the next showdown was going to be for control of New York City. The terrain favored the British, and you need only take a glance at a map and you'll see the problem. It's water. Lots of navigable water. You see, Washington had no navy, and he would be up against the world's most formidable navy. The main battle took place on Long Island. It would be the biggest battle in terms of assembled manpower of the entire Revolutionary War. Washington got there first and dug in. He faced the British Army under Lieutenant General Sir William Howe, the British Navy under Admiral Lord Howe, and the Hessian mercenaries. Before the battle began, Washington addressed his troops. He said, "The time is now near at hand which must probably determine whether Americans are to be free men or slaves, whether they are to have any property they can call their own, whether their homes and farms are to be pillaged and destroyed. The fate of unborn millions will now depend, under God, on the conduct and courage of this army. We have therefore to resolve to conquer or die. The American Army on Long Island was outnumbered by over 2 to 1 by a far superior, more disciplined military. The battle ended in a disaster, with over 2,000 Americans either killed or wounded. Now, that should have been the end of the war, but in a move that, in hindsight, was a fatal mistake, the British backed off and did not finish off the Americans. They decided they would wait until the morning. That evening, a drenching rain descended. Washington had developed a secret plan for retreat that involved moving his nearly 9,000 men, cannons, horses, and carriages across a mile of river to safety on the other side. The rain muffled the sound of the retreat, and that night, Massachusetts fishermen and soldiers shuttled boats back and forth in the hopes of moving every last man before dawn. As dawn approached, there were still many men trapped on Long Island. Multiple diaries from the time recorded what happened next. Major General Ben Talmadge wrote, "Those of us who remained in the trenches became very anxious for our own safety, and when the dawn appeared, there were several regiments still on duty. At this time, a very dense fog began to rise out of the ground and off the river, and it seemed to settle in a peculiar manner over both encampments. I recollect this peculiar providential occurrence perfectly well. And so very dense was the atmosphere that I could scarcely discern a man at 6 yards distant. We tarried until the sun had risen, but the fog remained as dense as ever. Soon after, it lifted, and the British discovered that the entire American army had vanished, as if by a miracle. Indeed, Washington would also conclude that it was divine providence that had saved the Americans that day."
And with that as our backdrop, we're going to see some of what remains of our revolutionary heritage in New York City.
A third of the King's army was made of Germans. The British Empire had expanded past the ability of England to control it with only its own native-born troops. So King George had to cut a deal to borrow about 30,000 mercenaries in his war against America. The colonialists bitterly resented the imposition of these foreign troops, who they called Hessians, after the principality in Germany, Hesse-Kassel, where most of them came from.
These Hessian soldiers weren't exactly mercenaries or soldiers of fortune that you would think of in a modern sense, kind of like Missing in Action 2. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't cool like that. No. These Hessian soldiers were often forced into service by their prince, Frederick II. Sometimes they were old and weak and frail, and many of them didn't really want to be here in the first place. Behind me is a Hessian hut. Now, Hessian soldiers camped out in huts like this at this farm during the occupation of New York. This particular hut was erected in the early 1900s using original materials discovered at this site by an amateur archaeologist. So you can see that this hut is both original and a reproduction at the same time. Now you might see a cute little log cabin. Not me. No, I see a dark, dank dream house for germs. Would be some 60 years before an Italian named Agostino Bassi was credited first with stating the germ theory for disease, one of my personal heroes. Anyway, during the Revolutionary War era, people were pretty much clueless about that kind of stuff. So for every Hessian soldier killed in battle, 5 were killed by accidents and disease. Anybody seen my hand sanitizer?
30,000 Hessian troops, about 20,000 survived the war. Of those, almost a quarter of them decided to stay in America and make it their new home.
The bee. That's one of those big bumblebees, too. Those don't sting, though, do they? We're driving through New York on the way to Morris Mansion, located in historic Washington Heights. It's the oldest house in Manhattan and served as the headquarters for both sides in the American Revolution. The home, built by Roger Morris in 1765, was built in the Palladian style of architecture. This style of architecture was made immensely popular by the 16th century Italian architect Palladio. It includes this monumental portico supported by 4 massive columns. And there's this large 2-story octagonal-shaped addition at the rear. Now, it's believed that this octagon-shaped room was the first of its kind in the country. Octagonal, of course, meaning 8 sides.
Between September 14th and October 20th, 1776, General George Washington used the mansion as his temporary headquarters after he and his army were forced to evacuate Brooklyn Heights after their loss to the British Army. Later, this home became the headquarters of British Lieutenant General Sir Henry Clinton, and then the Hessian commander Baron Wilhelm von Kniphausen.
Some have speculated that this house had some special meaning to George Washington, who some 20 years earlier visited New York for the first time as a young militia colonel. He met a young lady named Polly Phillips, who some say he was quite taken by. But Polly married Roger Morris, who went on to become a Tory, a loyalist, while Washington was the leader of the American army. Poor Polly. She and her husband were driven from their beautiful home because of the war. After the war, the house was empty and was put up for sale. When George Washington was president, he decided to bring his cabinet up here to all have dinner at the former HQ. Dinner guests included Alexander Hamilton, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and his wife, Abigail. I love New York. The Prison Ship Martyrs Monument is erected here in Brooklyn. It consists of this 100-foot wide granite staircase and a Doric-style column in the middle, about 149 feet high. Now, the memorial marks the site of a crypt containing the remains of some 11,500 prisoners of war. These prisoners of war became known as the Prison Ship Martyrs. One prison ship that was anchored here was the HMS Jersey.
The HMS Jersey was a vessel in the Royal Navy. It became infamous for serving as a prison ship in the American Revolutionary War, but before that, the HMS Jersey was a warship and saw significant action in battle. It was in service in the British Navy for over 30 years, and then, in 1771, her masts were taken down and she was converted to a hospital ship. After the Revolutionary War broke out, the ship was converted one last time, this time to a prison.
As a prison ship, the HMS Jersey quickly developed a hellish reputation. Hundreds of men were crammed into the spaces below decks where there was no light, no heat, and no fresh air. The stench and the filth was overwhelming, and brutal mistreatment by the British prison guards was commonplace. In fact, one survivor estimated that 8 men died every day in captivity.
In 1778, an escaped prisoner, Robert Sheffield, wrote the following account about the American men living below decks. Their sickly countenances and ghastly looks were truly horrible. Some swearing and blaspheming, some crying, praying, and wringing their hands and stalking about like ghosts. Others delirious, raving and storming, some groaning and dying, all panting for breath. Some dead and corrupting air so foul at times that a lamp could not be kept burning, by reason of which the boys were not missed till they had been dead 10 days.
Getting taken prisoner and thrown onto a prison ship must have felt like a fate worse than death to the POWs who were held here. More American soldiers and sailors died from intentional neglect than died on all the battlefields in the entire American Revolution. The Defense Department currently estimates 4,435 U.S. battle deaths during the Revolutionary War, but an additional 20,000 died in captivity. All right, pop quiz. I say New York food, you say what? Pizza, right? That's what I would say. Because I love pizza as much as I love history, I thought, while I'm in New York City, why not visit the oldest pizzeria in the entire city? Strike that. The oldest pizzeria in the country, Lombardi's.
Lombardi's opened a small grocery store in New York's Little Italy in 1897. By 1905, they had established the first pizzeria in America, and their customer base was mostly the Italian immigrants living in the neighborhood. Over 100 years later, Lombardi's Pizza is still recognized as the best pizza in New York. The pizza at Lombardi's starts with an old family recipe. The dough is made and then hand-tossed. A homemade tomato sauce is applied, and then cheese and toppings are added with care. Next, the pizza pies are cooked at just the right temperature in an old coal-fired oven. The end result is a wonderful potpourri of pizza flavors. The flavor of the crust has sometimes been attributed to the minerals present in the New York City tap water. Believe it or not, New York City has some of the best tap water in the nation, and it is said that some out-of-state pizza makers even transport the water cross-country for the sake of authenticity. I don't know if that's true, you know, it is said, finger quotes. Today, Lombardi's is run by John Brescio.
What's your personal opinion, John, of the development of pizza in America? Chunks of fruit on the pizza, Thai, chicken, teriyaki. You got a personal opinion about that?
In Lombardi's, you got to eat traditional tops. And I know you're from Texas and all that, but if you're trying to start changing what I'm doing here, you're in the wrong place too, okay?
Can I suggest a barbecue, maybe beef jerky pizza or something?
You can't suggest nothing here.
You know, John may come across as a bit of a tough character, but yeah, I could tell he really appreciated my suggestions.
Here we are, Fort Washington. This is the location of Fort Washington. It's the highest elevation in the area and overlooks the Hudson River, which was in control of American forces. The Hudson River was on the other side of that apartment building. You're gonna have to just trust me on that one. Now, the companion fort to Fort Washington was Fort Lee, and that was across the river over on the New Jersey side.
American Major General Israel Putnam ordered that vessels were to be sunk in the river channel between the forts. These obstructions in the river, combined with cannon fire from the twin forts, were designed to block the British from sailing past this point on the Hudson River. It was believed by the Americans that any British ships attempting to sail past the forts would sustain severe losses. Fort Washington was defended by almost 3,000 Continental Army troops and militia. However, after the fall of New York City to the British, the two forts were left isolated.
On the morning of November 16, 1776, British and German troops under the command of British General Lord Howe attacked Fort Washington. The Americans put up a fierce battle, but they were forced to surrender because the British and Hessian forces managed to break down their walls with cannon fire. It was a tremendous loss for the American forces. 4 days later, Fort Lee over in New Jersey was evacuated, leaving most of the fort's gunpowder and arms to fall into British hands. With the collapse of both forts, the Hudson River was open to British shipping. British merchant ships and warships could move freely until the construction of West Point in 1778. Start spreading the news, I'm leaving today. I wanna be a part of it, New York, New York. Milady? I'm here in Central Park near Harlem to talk about the Battle of Harlem Heights. Now, the Battle of Harlem Heights was a minor engagement, and its outcome was indecisive, but it showed the American troops that they could win in battle after the loss at Long Island. On September 16, 1776, the Americans still controlled northern Manhattan, though the British had captured the southern portion of the island.
American skirmishers engaged British troops near 106th Street and Broadway. The Americans held their position under fire but were forced to retreat as the British troops were joined by reinforcements. The fighting ranged north to about 125th Street before Washington decided to send troops forward in two flanking maneuvers, one under Major Leach and the other under Colonel Knowlton. A third force of Americans attacked the British in their front.
The number of troops grew to nearly 5,000 men on each side, while the British, who were surrounded on three sides, were pushed back to what is now 106th Street. Washington called off the attack after 6 hours because the Americans were not ready for an engagement with the full British Army. Both Major Leach and Colonel Knowlton gave their lives in this battle. Although not technically a win for the Americans, the battle boosted the Army's morale and confidence in battle. Washington stated that this little advantage has inspired our troops prodigiously. Some historians see Harlem Heights as a turning point in the Americans' efforts to build an effective army. I do love my adventure trailer. I can't help myself, I just love the great outdoors. So when we came to New York, I was a little afraid we weren't going to find a very good camping spot. I was wrong. Who knew you could camp out on Times Square? Just love the great outdoors.
Now, how did I end up here, you ask? Let's rewind about 30 minutes.
Well, I'm navigating my way through New York City, looking for Times Square, a place that has become an iconic world landmark. Now, Times Square was formerly known as Longacre Square, then was renamed after the Times building, the former offices for the New York Times newspaper. Well, today it is perhaps best known as an altar to the gods of crass commercialism. For the record, I am against crass commercialism. You can read all about it on my blog, where you can purchase DVDs of drive-thru history and t-shirts and posters and action figures and lunchboxes. Just go to www.drivethruhistory.com. We accept all major credit cards and checks and cash, money orders, you name it. New York, New York. How are you doing, everybody? I'm here! People just can't seem to get enough of me.
The intersection of Broadway and 42nd Street at this corner of Times Square is the eastern terminus of the Lincoln Highway, the first road to cross the entire nation.
You know, the word terminus is a Latin word that means endpoint. There was a Roman god named Terminus who was the god of endpoints and boundary markers. In fact, in ancient times, neighbors used to celebrate boundary markers by feasting and offering sacrifices to Terminus. I won't be doing that here today, but I digress.
The Lincoln Highway was America's first transcontinental highway, the first practical automobile road that linked the East with the West. This was one end, and Lincoln Park in San Francisco was the other. The road traversed almost 3,400 miles through 14 states and 500 cities and towns, and was affectionately called the Main Street across America. The road incorporated many historic roads, including one laid out by Dutch colonists in 1675. It was built with private funds and promoted by entrepreneur Carl G. Fisher, inventor Thomas Edison, Presidents Theodore Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson. The route was dedicated with fireworks and great fanfare in October of 1913. Well, it was back to the only parking spot I could find close enough with ample space to set up camp.
Woo!
In Times Square.
Love nature. I might rustle up some grub. I think I'd rather order a pizza. Call John over at Lombardi's. Hey, John. Yeah, it's Dave. Hey, can I get a large cheese pizza? Location? Yeah, you know the little traffic island over on 46th and Broadway? Yeah, Times Square. Yeah, no, I know you don't normally deliver this far out, but maybe you can make an exception just this once. Great, thanks. 25 minutes? All right. That was easy. He's helping out the cops, man. There you go. Yeah.
Hey, one cheese pizza.
Thanks a lot. Keep the change.
Hey! Hey, how about a little something?
Times Square.
Are you having fun?
Who knew you could camp here? Yeah, I'm having a great time. What's that? I just love the outdoors, you know? So, you know, it's a great way to like experience, yeah, I just like peace and quiet, you know?
Peace and quiet.
Get away from it all.
Yeah.
Right. I'm not talking to myself. I just want to buy products.